Most people believe that fear is merely a response to the world, a signal that something external is wrong, something to be avoided, managed, or conquered. They see their anxieties as a reaction to life happening to them, a bad presentation, a potential betrayal, a negative outcome waiting in the wings. And so, they spend their days trying to control those outcomes, to over-prepare, to guard themselves, to outmaneuver the future they dread. But what if that understanding is incomplete? What if fear is not just a reaction, but also a transmission, a powerful, focused signal that the universe is not resisting at all, but precisely responding to? This phenomenon, where our deepest anxieties seem to materialize in our lives, is not a coincidence. It's not a curse. It is a mechanism, one that finds a quiet, unsettling echo in one of the most profound principles in science, the observer effect. Today, we will explore this mechanism. We will begin with the familiar territory of the human mind and its repetitive cycles. Move through spiritual frameworks that have described this dynamic for centuries, and then journey into the strange world of quantum physics, not to find mystical proof, but to uncover a metaphor so structurally accurate that it may change how you interpret your own experience. Because what if the key to stopping the creation of what you fear is hidden, not in fighting fear itself, but in changing how you are observing your reality? Before we venture into the subatomic, let's begin with the process that runs quietly and continuously inside the human mind. The experience of attracting what you fear is not mysterious. It is a well-documented psychological pattern. In 1948, sociologist Robert Merton gave this pattern a name: the self-fulfilling prophecy. He described it as a belief that, though initially false, sets in motion a chain of behaviors that ultimately bring the belief into reality. The process unfolds in a remarkably consistent loop. First, a belief forms, often subtle at first, and often rooted in fear. I am not good enough for this role. Second, your behavior begins to shift, almost imperceptibly, to align with that belief. You hesitate slightly before speaking in meetings. You avoid ambitious projects. You communicate with a tone that lacks conviction. Your posture tightens. Your timing changes. Without realizing it, you begin broadcasting uncertainty. Third, other people respond not to your internal belief, but to the behavior it produces. They sense hesitation. They interpret it as doubt or lack of readiness. Opportunities quietly move elsewhere. And fourth, their response confirms the original belief. See, I knew it. The prophecy completes itself. But this is the crucial insight. You did not discover a future that was already fixed. You participated in creating it. Your fear did not magically repel success. Your fear-guided behavior shaped the conditions that made success less likely. This is not mysticism. It is a direct psychological feedback loop. A student who fears failure becomes anxious, avoids studying, procrastinates, and performs poorly, confirming the fear. A person who fears scarcity becomes overly cautious, avoids investing in their growth, and misses opportunities, gradually creating the very lack they were trying to prevent. This loop is intensified by a neurological filtering system known as the reticular activating system, or RAS. The RAS functions like a relevance filter for reality. It determines what you notice, what you ignore, and what stands out. And it prioritizes whatever carries strong emotional charge. When fear dominates fear of rejection, for example, the RAS begins scanning the environment specifically for evidence of rejection. A delayed text message is no longer neutral. It becomes suspicious. A colleague's neutral feedback feels critical. A missed invitation feels personal. You are not suddenly attracting more rejection. You are selectively noticing it, interpreting it, and often behaving in ways that invite it. Over time, fear curates your lived experience. It shapes what you see, how you respond, and how others respond to you in return. This psychological loop alone explains why life can begin to feel like a repetition of the same unwanted patterns. And yet, for many people, something about this still feels incomplete, as if another layer is operating beneath the surface. For centuries, spiritual traditions have described this same dynamic, but through a different lens. Long before modern psychology or neuroscience, they pointed to an underlying principle like attracts like. Today, this idea is most commonly known as the law of attraction. While its modern pop culture version is often oversimplified, the core insight behind it remains both subtle and profound. At its heart, this framework suggests that reality is not just material, but fundamentally energetic. Everything, objects, thoughts, emotions, carries a certain quality or frequency. And according to this view, you do not attract what you want in theory. You attract what you consistently embody in practice. Emotional states play a central role here. Emotions, such as love, gratitude, and trust, are described as coherent and expansive. Emotions such as fear, shame, and chronic anxiety are described as contracted and dissonant. The unsettling implication is this: the universe does not respond to your intentions as words or wishes. It responds to the dominant emotional state you are living in. If fear is persistent fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of not being enough, it becomes your primary signal, not as a conscious choice, but as a background hum, a steady transmission of danger, lack, or unworthiness. And within this framework, the universe does not judge that signal. It simply remains coherent with it, reflecting back experiences that match its tone. This is why fear can appear to act like a magnet. When you fear heartbreak, you become guarded. You hesitate to open fully. You monitor yourself. You brace for loss. And while these behaviors feel protective, they subtly block the very intimacy you say you want. Your entire system becomes organized around avoiding pain. And in doing so, it stays energetically aligned with the state of being hurt. This framework is often misunderstood as claiming that every negative thought creates a negative outcome. That is not the point. What matters is not momentary emotion, but emotional residence, the state you return to again and again. The beliefs stored in the subconscious, often formed through early experiences or unresolved trauma, operate continuously beneath awareness. If a past experience taught you, people always leave, that belief doesn't shout, it whispers. It shapes expectations. It influences how closely you attach, how quickly you pull away, and what you interpret as threat. Within this spiritual model, this becomes a kind of energetic, self-fulfilling prophecy. The proposed solution is not suppression of fear, nor forced positivity. It is acknowledgement and redirection. By becoming aware of your emotional baseline and consciously cultivating a different internal state, one of safety, trust, or self-worth, you change the signal you are broadcasting, and as the signal changes, so does what remains coherent with your experience. What makes this framework especially compelling is not whether it can be scientifically proven, but how closely it echoes patterns we later find described very differently in modern physics. This is where the journey turns toward the counterintuitive world of quantum mechanics. You have likely heard the phrase, the observer effect, used to suggest that consciousness itself can shape physical reality. This idea has become deeply embedded in modern spiritual language, and it is also one of the most frequently misunderstood concepts in all of physics. So before going any further, clarity matters. The observer effect is not a metaphor invented by spirituality. It is a real, experimentally verified phenomenon, most famously demonstrated in the double-slit experiment. In simple terms, when tiny particles such as electrons are fired toward a barrier with two narrow openings, their behavior depends on whether they are being measured. When no measurement takes place, the particles behave like waves. They pass through both slits simultaneously, creating an interference pattern on the screen behind them. In this state, the electron does not occupy a single path. It exists in a superposition of possibilities. The moment a detector is placed at the slits to determine which path the electron takes, the behavior changes. The interference pattern disappears. The electron behaves like a single particle, choosing one definite path. Possibility gives way to actuality. This is where misunderstanding often begins. It is tempting to conclude that a conscious observer causes this collapse. But that is not what the science shows. In quantum mechanics, observation does not require awareness. It requires interaction. To measure the particle, the detector must physically interact with it by exchanging energy or information. It is this interaction that disturbs the system and forces it out of its probabilistic state. So let us be absolutely clear, the quantum observer effect does not mean that your thoughts or fears directly manipulate physical events at a distance. Your anxiety does not cause a car to swerve. Consciousness is not collapsing wave functions in daily life. And yet, the structure of the principle remains profoundly useful as a metaphor. At the quantum level, a system exists as a range of possibilities until interaction selects a specific outcome. Nothing is fixed until something engages with it. Now consider your own life. The future is not a single path, it is a field of potential outcomes. What psychology and spiritual frameworks suggest is that focused attention, especially when charged with emotion, functions like an observer. When you repeatedly fixate on a feared outcome, you are not bending physical laws, but you are shaping perception, expectation, and behavior. Your attention interacts with possibility. Fear narrows focus. It trains the mind to look for specific threats. It guides decisions, timing, posture, and response. Over time, the range of possibilities contracts not because the universe is conspiring against you, but because your mode of engagement has become highly selective. In this sense, fear acts like a metaphorical measurement. It repeatedly checks one outcome, reinforces it, and organizes behavior around it. The result is not quantum collapse, but psychological convergence. One possibility becomes more and more likely because it is the one you are constantly preparing for, reacting to, and rehearsing internally. The observer effect does not prove that consciousness creates matter, but it does offer a striking parallel. Reality, at its deepest level, is not static. It emerges through interaction, and, in human experience, attention is one of the most powerful forms of interaction we possess. You are not collapsing wave functions, but through fear-driven focus, you may be collapsing your own field of potential. At this point, it becomes essential to slow down and clarify terms. The word observer has been used in several contexts, and although these ideas often get blended together, they operate in entirely different domains. Untangling them is what prevents confusion and prevents this discussion from drifting into misunderstanding. First, there is the quantum observer effect. This belongs strictly to physics. It describes how the act of measurement physically interacts with a quantum system, altering its state. No awareness, intention, or consciousness is required. The detector does not watch the particle, it disturbs it. This effect occurs at the subatomic level and does not scale upward to explain everyday events or personal experiences. Second, there is the Hawthorne effect, a concept from social science. It refers to the tendency of people to change their behavior simply because they know they are being observed by others. Workers may become more productive when they feel watched. Students may behave differently during an evaluation. This effect is about external observation influencing behavior. And while it is well documented, it is not what we are discussing here. Third and most relevant to this conversation is the self-fulfilling prophecy. This is not a law of physics, but a psychological mechanism. And it is here that the idea of a metaphorical observer effect becomes useful. In this context, your own focused awareness, particularly when infused with fear, acts as the observer. When attention repeatedly locks onto a specific expectation, it shapes perception, biases interpretation, and guides action. Over time, the world appears to confirm what was expected, not because reality was predetermined, but because behavior and perception have been quietly organized around that expectation. This is where the quantum metaphor helps not as an explanation, but as a mental model. In quantum mechanics, a system exists as potential until interaction selects an outcome. In human experience, your life contains many possible trajectories. Focused attention is the interaction that repeatedly selects one. Fear, in this sense, is not passive. It is an active form of engagement. It narrows attention, limits behavioral options, and collapses choice. Not by altering the universe, but by altering how you meet it. So while fear does not collapse wave functions, it absolutely collapses possibility space. It turns a wide field of potential futures into a much narrower path, often the very one you were hoping to avoid. Understanding the mechanism is only the beginning. Insight alone does not break the cycle. What creates real change is learning how to shift the observer itself, the position from which you relate to fear, possibility, and action. If focused fear can narrow your future, then a different mode of observation can widen it again. This is not about eliminating fear. Fear is a biological signal, not an enemy. The work is not to destroy fear, but to remove it from the role of decision-maker. The first step is awareness. This step is deceptively simple and often misunderstood. When fear arises, the goal is not to push it away or calm it down immediately. It is to notice it as an experience. You might say, fear is present in my body right now. This language matters. You are no longer saying, I am afraid. You are recognizing fear as something you are aware of, not something you are. This creates psychological distance, and distance creates choice. When fear is observed without judgment, it begins to lose its grip. You are no longer reacting automatically. You are no longer inside the fear, you are witnessing it. In this moment, the observer has already shifted. The second step is deconstruction. Fear rarely appears out of nowhere. It is almost always rooted in past experience, learned expectation, or an old narrative that once served a protective function. Ask gently, where did this belief come from? Was it formed in childhood, reinforced by a single painful event, absorbed from family, culture, or repetition? This is not about blaming the past. It is about updating the present. When an unconscious belief is brought into conscious awareness, it stops operating in the dark. Even understanding why a fear exists begins to loosen its authority. What once felt like truth starts to reveal itself as a pattern, not a fact. The third step, and the most commonly misunderstood, is to pivot your focus. This does not mean forcing positive thoughts or pretending fear is gone. That often backfires. Because the nervous system does not respond to language, it responds to state. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" the more effective question is, "What emotional state would someone who already feels safe, worthy, or whole be living from?" Then the work becomes learning how to access that state, even briefly. If you fear scarcity, repeating "I am abundant" may feel false and create resistance. But focusing on gratitude for what is already stable or sufficient is something the body can register as real. Gratitude shifts the system out of lack and into coherence. If you fear loneliness, focusing on self-connection, creative engagement, or moments of genuine enjoyment begins to retrain the nervous system towards safety and openness. This is why emotion matters more than affirmation. The feeling is the signal. When the internal state changes, perception changes with it. And when perception changes, behavior naturally follows. Finally, this internal shift must be paired with aligned action. Inner coherence without action remains incomplete. Action is not about forcing outcomes, it is about expressing the new state in the physical world. When you feel a genuine sense of self-respect, you might update your resume or set a boundary. When you feel grounded rather than desperate, you might accept a social invitation without overthinking it. These actions are often small, but they are crucial. They signal to your own nervous system and to the world that something has changed. Action is the bridge between possibility and experience. Emotion opens the field. Action selects the path. Over time, these small shifts compound. Fear no longer dominates the observer's seat. Awareness does. Choice does. And gradually, the field of possibility begins to widen again, not because reality has been forced to comply, but because you are finally meeting it from a different position. We began with a simple but unsettling question. Why does it so often feel like we attract the very things we fear? What we've seen is that this experience is not a curse, not bad luck, and not a flaw in the universe. It is a system, one that operates quietly, consistently, and across multiple layers of human experience. Psychologically, fear initiates self-fulfilling loops. The beliefs we carry shape how we behave, how we interpret events, and how others respond to us. Over time, these feedback loops make certain outcomes more likely, not because they were destined, but because they were rehearsed into reality. Spiritually, ancient frameworks suggest that our dominant emotional state acts as a signal. Fear organizes the system around protection and lack, and reality responds with experiences that mirror that state, not as punishment, but as coherence. And while quantum physics does not demonstrate that consciousness manipulates matter, the observer effect offers a powerful metaphor. At the deepest level of nature, possibility remains open until interaction selects an outcome. In human life, that interaction is often attention. Where fear fixes attention, possibility narrows. The crucial insight is this: fear is not something happening to you. It is something happening through you until you become aware of it. And the moment awareness enters, the mechanism begins to change. You are not powerless in this process. You are not condemned to repeat the same patterns. The same system that once amplified fear can just as easily support clarity, stability, and growth when the observer shifts. By learning to notice fear without identifying with it, by questioning the stories that sustain it, by choosing emotional states your nervous system can genuinely inhabit, and by taking small actions that align with those states, you stop reinforcing the reality you fear. You begin participating in a different one. This is not about controlling life, It is about changing how you meet it. And from that subtle shift, new possibilities become visible possibilities that were always there, waiting for a different observer. You do not eliminate fear by fighting it. You move beyond it by no longer letting it define the observation. And in that quiet change, your reality begins to reorganize naturally, gradually, and from the inside out.